We have implemented trauma-informed care communication in our facility. We are educating all of our residents, our surgeons, our faculty, our staff. And I always say workforce because that to me is vendors and contract labor and everything else. And when we start to really understand how our actions and our words are making a difference in people's lives, both good and bad, that's when we could start tackling how we are providing the care appropriately.
Clock in, scrub up, and join us behind the red line. You're listening to First Case, a perioperative podcast bringing you exciting interviews, engaging discussions, and innovative solutions that are changing the way patients receive surgical care. Each episode, we talk to frontline staff, perioperative leadership, and nursing entrepreneurs from across the country as they share their stories, experience, and expertise on the industry we love. From the back table to the boardroom, from wheels in to wheels out, we tackle the real-life issues affecting the OR. Whether you're tuning in for surgical service education or inspiration, we're glad you're here. And now it's time to roll back and start the first case.
Welcome to season 15 of the First Case podcast. In this season, we are going beyond the procedure and developing a more holistic view of our patients. And we are kicking off the conversation with JD Buchert. He is the Director of Workforce Safety at Parkland Health in Dallas, Texas. And in today's interview, he is going to help us look at the overall need for culturally appropriate care and really open our eyes to the needs that our patients have when they come and interact with the healthcare system.
I agree, but you know what? I have a feeling JD is not going to just teach us a lot about our patients. We're going to learn a lot about ourselves as well. So I'm ready. Ears open, mouth shut. Unless it's my turn.
There's going to be a lot of self-awareness driven into us throughout the whole season. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with JD Buchert.
Hi, I'm Chris Blevins.
And I'm Melanie Perry.
From the studios of Healthcare HQ, you're listening to First Case.
Joining us today to help us kick off season 15 and this whole season of learning about and understanding our perioperative patients and the people that are on the table in front of us is JD Buchert, Director of Workforce Safety at Parkland Health in Dallas, Texas. JD, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, thank you so very much for having me. I've been very fortunate to be with you before, and I have become a First Case podcast fanatic. I talk about it quite often, and obviously you already know that I'm a Melanie Perry fan. So I think you've already passed Katie in many areas, and I feel privileged to be here with you. So thank you.
Well, really, the honor and the privilege is ours. And you just mentioned it. Yes, you have been a guest before. And for all of you listening, I highly encourage you to check out JD's interview with us on workplace violence. Season 13, episode 6, workplace violence and what we're doing about it. And so when you're finished with this interview today, go back and listen to that one because you will learn a lot from that conversation. But for this season is all about understanding who the patient is underneath our drapes. We can get so focused on what procedure they're having that sometimes we forget to take the rest of the person into account. What social, cultural, or religious beliefs might affect their care? And how can we, as perioperative nurses and surgical techs, better understand them to provide more holistic care? So that's what we're going to look at today, and the bigger picture of providing that care in an inclusive and culturally competent manner. And JD is going to be helping us introduce this theme and this topic. But I've already given all the spoilers away. So before we go any further, why don't you just go ahead and introduce yourself to everyone who doesn't know you?
My name is JD Buchert. I have been in healthcare in the perioperative setting for about 35 years and in healthcare for nearly 40 years. Obviously, you can't see me, but it doesn't look like I've been in it that long because I worked in plastic surgery for many years, and I might know a few tricks of the trade.
You need to share them with me.
Yes, we'll have that on
So
our next
I'm
episode,
very
right?
fortunate that I'm very active in health policy, healthcare policy, across the gamut of healthcare. So, but my primary focus and one of my mentors in life always said the perfect sentence when it comes to perioperative, and I'm going to say I'm stealing from the best, and then I'll learn from the rest. Is that I'm an OR nurse first. It was my first passion, my first love, and I love that patient population. I had to leave the OR because of surgical smoke. It's health consequences that I received from it, but I've always been involved with it. And so I'm at a level now where I'm able to advocate for the perioperative staff, but also work in tandem with them to educate on the importance of how we advocate for our patients. And I think that's part of what we're discussing today, because when you have a bigger picture of that patient and that patient population that you are servicing and serving, you also will start to understand how that cultural, those disparities, those marginalizations that they sometimes receive can really play into their care that they receive. And as I also am sit on the board of directors for AORN, I always want to make sure that we follow our mission, and our primary mission is always going to be patient safety. And so sometimes our own personalized views can kind of trigger a risk. And so if we, one of my favorite sayings is knowledge is power. As long as we can garner that knowledge to how we can see life, see our patients, and try to grow from these experiences, that's when we are going to become even better in our careers, but also as human beings. So.
You make such a great point, and I kind of want to dive into that just a little more specifically because, you know, in surgery we do specialize, right? And so, you know, if our patient is there for a cardiovascular procedure or an orthopedic procedure, you know, it's very important to our role that we concentrate on that particular, you know, piece of the body, if you will. But so how, in a patient safety manner or just in the care of the patient in general, is seeing that patient more holistically? Why is that so important to what we are doing in the operating
Well,
room?
I always think that when we get a better and a bigger picture of the patient that we are serving and advocating for and circulating for or scrubbing for, or something to that aspect, we are able to really start to truly advocate for that patient, because these are the things that we want to eliminate from the perioperative setting, and it's going to be very difficult. I mean, we already know that stereotyping is there. And so, but there's so many times that I have heard from people that they know it's wrong, but they don't say anything, or they don't advocate at that time. So the more knowledge we have, and as a circulator is the one that is truly advocating for that patient, they are they are reviewing that patient's chart, finding that history, finding anything that may become marginalized in the health care that we provide. And so those are the things that, along with the procedures and the appropriate timeouts and the appropriate equipment and everything, that we want to share with everybody in the room. Anesthesia is focusing on one thing. Our surgeons and our residents are focusing on the procedure itself. Our advanced practice providers are in there. Our scrub techs, our scrub nurses, all of those that are in the room should have knowledge on that person's preference, that person's cultural differences that may become a snicker to somebody, but can become very offensive to others. And we do not want to have a demarginalized patient or staff member that walks out of there feeling, how embarrassed am I for being in there and not saying anything? Or, gosh, I wish that I would have not let them get away with what they said. So when we can share that knowledge with the room and advocate on a different level than just their safety, but also their psychological safety, this is where we start to become very in tune with the full well-being that we should be providing.
Yeah, definitely. And when we think about it, there are a lot of others, if you see my little air quotes as I say that. But there are a lot of people that have different norms and different values, different social, cultural differences. We're not going to work in a world where everybody is exactly like us. But like you said, education and knowledge becomes the power that we need in order to care for them in an appropriate way that helps them feel safe and well cared for. But if we break it down, you could make a list for days. But on the surface, what are we talking about? Who are those patients who might come in feeling different or feeling marginalized or stereotyped?
Well, I'm just going to give a really wide variance on this. Obviously, we're talking about LGBTQ plus communities. We're talking about any race that might be different than yours. Maybe a foreign population that is being serviced here that may not understand the language that we speak, or a religious segment that we may not understand what their common practices are, cultural differences that may be offended by the palm of a hand or a male touching you or seeing your hair. These are things that we have to take in consideration when we're doing this. The more advanced knowledge we have on this, the more that we are able to make sure that the appropriate care is given. But, there's also another area of people that we don't consider, but we fear drastically. And that's probably like white supremacists. Those are our inmates and our prisoners that we are providing care to, our gang members, things of that aspect. I know that that can be a very fine line for us to walk because, I'm just going to say sometimes I have difficulty in somebody's opinions, a general population, or I may have questions when it comes to providing care to somebody that may have hurt or killed somebody. And so when we start to think of that, that's when we really need to start to really focus on what our primary mission is. And so that's where we kind of have to lose our etiquette, our personalities, our personal beliefs, and set them to the side, because we also have to think, what is the first thing that we want to do? We want to provide safe surgeries to our patients.
Yeah. So in that, like as an educator, like I constantly want to tell my students, you have to advocate, you have to, you have to point things out, you have to do all the, we tell them do, right? But people don't always innately come with the skill set in order to be able to communicate in that way. And we have to teach them how to say things. We have to teach them how to do that. And so that's what I was curious about. Like, so how do we handle situations where things are different, or we may be uncomfortable, or, you may be dealing with a patient population that you're unfamiliar with.
There's a new terminology that's coming into healthcare, and that's called trauma-informed care. And when we speak of trauma-informed care, it can be things that may trigger a person to be reclusive or become aggressive, or something that aspect. It's a trauma that may have happened to them in the past, like a soldier being injured in the military and still dealing with that trauma every day, that PTSD scenario. That trauma could actually have an effect on our patients, but also on our caregivers. So sometimes we're bringing baggage to the table that it's very difficult for us to leave at the door. So when we start to utilize trauma-informed care and communication, that's where we're starting to grow into the environment of really focusing on how can we hit this individual physically, psychologically, emotionally, to support the entire process of what we're doing. Because there's nothing that would make anybody feel less valued than going into the OR and hearing snickers, or seeing the people's facial expressions. And in the OR, as OR nurses and OR staff, we know that your eyes tell your full story. And we have learned how to express all of our emotions through our eyes. And And that's the last thing that we're doing. And obviously, what are we thinking? What is the last sense that we lose when we're going under anesthesia?
Our hearing.
And so as people are thinking that this patient may be asleep, what's the last thing that they may be hearing?
Judgment or
Uh,
critiques.
Judgment. Yes. And so we want to make sure that that is not the last thing or the first thing that they wake up to. And so by creating and advocating in a trauma-informed care aspect, it really starts to pull the team together as a unit, which is really awesome. We have implemented trauma-informed care communication in our facility. We are educating all of our residents, our surgeons, our faculty, our staff. And I always say workforce because that to me is vendors and contract labor and everything else. And when we start to really understand how our actions and our words are making a difference in people's lives, both good and bad, that's when we can start tackling how we are providing the care appropriately.
Well, and I think that actually flows well because it's already really started the explanation of this, but all of us will admit that different makes us uncomfortable and that different makes us unsure, maybe even hits at our confidence level to some degree because this person is different than what my norm may be, or this person is outside of what my normal experience is. And we still have to take care of any patient who comes across the red line, even if they are different outside the norm beyond what we are used to. But that makes us uncomfortable. And a lot of the times that discomfort is what drives the judgment or the snickers or the intolerance to different things. So how do we as caregivers address that feeling of discomfort and move past it so that we can still provide care that is inclusive and safe for our patients?
Well, I think that this is where our leaders really step in. When leaders set an environment that can create the best care that we can give, that's the first step. And with that, there comes educational opportunities, but also growth experiences that we should all be having. Because as we get our degrees as nurses or we get our degrees as surgical technologists or anybody that is in that surgical environment, we also got to consider this. We are built to continue to grow in our educational aspects. So we should always be open to how can we provide the best care? How can we provide the safest care? What can we do to save our facilities money? Anything to this aspect that is important, but a good leader is going to create that environment. A good leader is going to be the one that we hold accountable to create that environment. So as I advocate for legislation on a state and a national level, I will also advocate for the environment that we work in too. And that is not only that leadership in that perioperative setting, but what we're doing in that perioperative setting should be done through our entire healthcare system. So we're taking it outside of that leadership. And this is where we start to think about what is best practice. What is the newest incidents that we have or the newest information that we have that we can provide to reinforce the environment that we want to work in?
Well, and in all of this discussion about the care of the patient too, I think about your roles as nurses and your communication about what we're doing intraoperatively, and you have to be able to communicate that to the family to update them. And so your interaction and understanding of the cultural differences and the, implicit bias and things of those nature, you have to be able to have an understanding so that you can communicate respectfully and in a way that will benefit that family about their loved one on the table. So you really have to take all of that in consideration there as well. It will help you in that aspect of patient care too, right?
It's very true. If you think of a scenario where a Jehovah's Witness patient is losing blood and a provider resident may not be able to wrap their head around them not allowing blood because of their beliefs into the system. And so into their body. And so when we start to really think about it, how do we approach that or broach that subject with them as advocates, but we're still making sure that we create an environment that is not aggressive. And so it becomes we don't want to say it's a power play, because when we start to make sure that one person has more power than the other, that becomes an environment that can be difficult also. What it is that we are respectfully showing concern, and we want to make sure that the understanding is there and of the situation. And then there's also the times where we have to say legally or ethically, this is a wrong approach. We cannot force somebody to make a decision that they do not believe in.
Right. And that applies to so many of the different patient populations that we see. You brought up a good example with our Jehovah's Witness patients. We also have our Muslim patients, and there's a gamut of whether it has to do with modesty, whether they need to request a little bit extra attention or care when it comes to their prep, or maybe in pre-op, giving them the space that they need for for that undressing and changing. And obviously, sometimes all accommodations cannot be met, but that doesn't mean that we don't take the time to listen and see what we can do to give them the most comfort that we can provide, right? I mean, there's a fine line between giving in to every demand, because we might not have the staff to do everything, but we can be accommodating when it's possible with understanding and kindness, right?
Well, and this is where we approach that communication with honesty and saying, hey, if this is a trauma procedure, I can understand your preferences right now, but we are more focused on saving the life of your spouse or your daughter or your whoever. And so that is what we're doing. We will attempt to accommodate this throughout, but we have to start this now, because this may be a life-threatening event right now. So we always go life over limb first, right? And then what we're doing next is that we are being open and honest in our communication. But we also have to remember to document these things. That is where we're starting to fail as a healthcare system, because as they always say, if it's not documented, it never happened. But we're only thinking about medications, implants, anything to that aspect, our timeouts, all that other stuff. But there's that communication also, even if they're aggressive or anything, that open communication that really starts to lay out a pattern of patience or that cultural support that we can offer. Because those are the things that we're looking at as circulators, right? We should be looking at preferences. We should sometimes consider religion. We can also consider, when we're looking at this, do they want blood products? Do they want bovine products? Things to that aspect. We have to make sure that we are advocating in that aspect. So when we are looking at that medical record to go out there and get that full picture, we have to make sure that we look at those also, instead of just looking at this. Yeah, they went to this, the consent signs, the very basics on this. We have to really start to understand their culture, their religious beliefs, and all that other stuff. And as a male nurse, I know that there are many times that I have gone in to introduce myself to a patient. Obviously, the first thing they say is, "Are you a doctor?" And then the second thing, when you correct them and say, "No, I have chosen to be a nurse because that is what God wanted me to be," and so they're like, "Well, I don't want you to see me naked," or something to that aspect. And to overcome that conversation is through open, honest communication. Say, this is what I'm here for. I'm here to advocate for you. I want to make sure that anybody that's in the room is respecting you, respecting your values, respecting your culture, anything to that aspect. And it's bringing in, let the prayer circles happen. Let all of that, let's support it. And instead of tapping our watches saying, I'm going to be late and I'm going to have a late start. And
we have turnover.
We have a 30-minute turnover.
Right? Yeah. Well, JD, as all these conversations are happening and these realizations that this is important, not just, for so many reasons, right? But recommendations are one thing, implementation and policy is another. So how is this being transitioned into, facility driven and policy driven practices that are becoming more, I guess, consistent across the country, or at least in, your neck of the woods?
Within the last 5 years, we're starting to see changes in our procedures and our policy development and in healthcare in general. And that's that they're starting to implement that health equity into our procedures. And when we're speaking health equity, that's the umbrella that we fall under when it comes to culture, religion, sex, sexual orientation, anything to that aspect. Or it could be to the things that make us uncomfortable, inmates, supremacy, things to that aspect. When we start to build that in to our policy and procedure, it kind of gives us a guideline, right? It's like, it's a 1, 2, 3. It's like, okay, if this happens, what steps do I need to kind of consider? But also there is, and I'm going to take it back to those leaders too, when they start to create that environment, there's that whole S-bar that should be happening also. There's so many times in the military, the S-bar was tattooed on the back of our hand, and if we didn't utilize it, we had to pay. And so when I came into the civilian healthcare, I've only worked in civilian healthcare for about 11 or 12 years now. And so when I came into the civilian healthcare system, not understanding that that's not a part of everybody's everyday role. And it's started to be integrated into our healthcare now, that culture of safety and things to that aspect. But creating that first step, making sure that that person that you're handing off to understands their preferences, understands what some of their values are. Because as a person or a patient gets more and more nervous as they're getting closer and closer to that procedure, they tend to not open up and talk as much because they're thinking that their voice is not as important because they're going into surgery.
Right. And that's a shame, to feel like you no longer have a voice, to feel like your voice is not heard, or that your voice is not valid. And that is not a position that I would want to be in if I was the patient getting ready to go into surgery. And so I would hate that another patient would have that experience or have that feeling or be made to feel that way because of care that was given in a way that was not kind or that was not culturally appropriate, as the case may be. I think that that's actually a really good wrap up to this first conversation. Obviously, we're going to have a lot more throughout this season. And JD, here's a spoiler, he's coming back and we're going to talk to him again more just about transgender care. So don't worry, he'll be back on episode 5. But in general, as we talk about this at a high level, just remembering kind of like the golden rule, right? I would not want to be treated in anything less than a manner where I felt safe. And I wouldn't want a patient to experience something like that either. So JD, as we wrap this up, I want to give the mic back to you one more time. If you have any other final thoughts to add to this conversation before we close, take it away.
Well, I was thinking this, as healthcare professionals, especially in the perioperative setting, we need to get a fuller picture of our patient population that we serve. And as we're always so focused on the safety of that patient, we also need to start to focus on the well-being of that patient. And when we start thinking about the safety and the well-being of that patient, we're starting to see through literature and research that these patients are recovering faster. We're seeing that there is a tie to the care that they are receiving, but also patient satisfaction scores are huge, right? So when we start to create that environment as leaders or demand that our leaders start to implement this environment, it's going to benefit us as a whole in healthcare.
Absolutely. JD, we couldn't have said it better ourselves, but thank you so much for joining us. Of course, we're looking forward to talking to you again, but thank you for joining us for this conversation. It was the perfect way to start the season.
Well, thank you so very much for having me.
That was JD Buchert, Director of Workforce Safety at Parkland Health in Dallas, Texas. And One of the big takeaways, Chris, that I had from talking to JD today was his statement about remembering the safety and the well-being of the patient. Kind of like we're talking about this season, how it's not just the procedure, it's the patient underneath the drapes. Well, we also need to be able to take in both their safety and their well-being. And that was a really big takeaway for me listening to him talk.
And in order to do these things and like to grow in this way, you have to have that emotional intelligence to be self-aware of your own, your own reactions and your own interactions with your patients. And sometimes, especially in our world, that means slowing down for a second and self-reflecting and like processing. And we don't do that all the time. And so I think this conversation made me want to do that more. Like, take a minute, think back. Did you react appropriately? What were your own feelings? How could you do that better? And then having those conversations that maybe are going to be uncomfortable, but in the end, you're going to grow. And the next conversation and interaction with a human being, you're going to handle it better. And that's going to make you a better leader, a better caregiver, and just overall a better human being.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Take the time to educate yourself and advocate for your patients and advocate for their care, for their safety, their well-being, and just overall better outcomes in surgical care. But that is going to do it for today's interview. Tune in next week as we take a deeper look at implicit bias and how that can affect the care that we give as we speak with Darlene Murdoch. On behalf of Chris, myself, and our whole team, thanks for listening to First Case.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of First Case. As a reminder, you can help support us by subscribing to First Case on your favorite podcast app or by downloading the smartphone app on iPhone or Android. Simply search for First Case in the App Store or Google Play. The best thing about downloading the smartphone app is that you can access bonus content for certain episodes and view episodes in certain categories, like articles on the go and vendor spotlights. Are you following us on LinkedIn or Facebook yet? If you are and you love an episode or post, then let your social network know about it. Like, comment, or share our posts along with your thoughts and keep the conversation going. If you have any topics or guests that you would like to recommend for a future episode, just send us an email to info@firstcasemedia.com. We look forward to hearing from you.